I want to begin with Susan. What's happening right now, Susan? It's been only 2 months. It feels like a lot more. Is the agency going to be shut down entirely, do you predict? Or will the Secretary of State kind of reconstitute or re-resurrect it in some other form? What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Rosemary, for having me. And it's great to be here with former colleagues, sadly, to talk about this topic of really the attack on USAID, which has been relentless for the last 8 weeks. Where we are today is, as you described, the majority of the agency is put on administrative leave. They expect RIF notices, reduction in force notices, to come out next month. The offices have been dissolved in Washington, the main building, as many people saw, the Ronald Reagan building. And so we are down to a very small number of people who are actually still working right now. And as Secretary Rubio announced last week, 82% of the contracts have been terminated. So it is very grim. And what many of us out in the community are working on, and I just want to give a big shout out to everybody in the community, no matter where you are in the development community, whether, as a former alumni like ourselves or the partner community, the advocacy community, everyone's really working together, mainly for one thing. We have to make sure we absolutely do not lose the human capital and the expertise that has built up over more than 6 decades. And so while today the Secretary and the Doge are working on what remaining pieces of USAID will be merged into the State Department, we are all working very hard to make sure that we're supporting the staff, we're supporting the partners, our local partners, and most importantly, we're really making sure that we're not going to lose that expertise. And while maybe a small amount will remain in the State Department now, there's a memo floating around that there will be a small bureau in the State Department of Development and Humanitarian Assistance, maybe just a couple hundred people. We want to make sure that we're not going to lose the capacity, again, that's been built up. And why? Because it's important for our national security. As we know, the work that USAID has done over more than 6 decades has been for our own national interest. And so we believe deeply in the discipline of development. It is a discipline. There are incredibly skilled people across the agency and our partner community that we have to make sure that we retain. And so if they're not going to be in the State Department, which the majority of them will not, because they are only talking about a couple hundred people, so going from 14,000 people in the agency to just a couple hundred, we need to make sure that we do everything to capture the knowledge and retain that expertise so that we will rebuild again.
Wow. Francisco, let me build on something that Susan just mentioned. According to Elon Musk, and Rubio has supported this as well, this had to be done. That money from USAID was not really hitting foreign markets, foreign people who needed it, but was going to CIA fronts and big contractors. And that there is also a need for more money to be spent on health and poverty diminishment in the United States. And why not? And that foreign aid really hasn't made a big difference. So these cuts are justified. Is any of that true? Is there a germ of truth or a big truth in that? Respond to that, please.
Yeah, no, great question. Quite the contrary. USAID and many of its implementing partners has really helped secure, economic prosperity, American security, and America's standing around the world. When we invest in global health programs halfway across the world, we ensure that they don't actually come to the shores of the United States. When we help train and educate people in Central America, we make it less likely that they then immigrate and come over to the United States. When we project an image of the world, with using our soft power skills, it makes it less likely that our adversaries will project their model of development to the world and recreate the vision of the world, that's less democratic, less prosperous, and less secure.
Coming back to you, Susan, do you think one of the reasons USAID was targeted first, we already know it's not going to be the only target, but it was first. Does it have anything to do with the fact that they could get away with it? Americans are not really all that familiar with USAID. Is
I
that?
think you're absolutely right. One of the things that has prohibited us since our founding of really being able to publicize USAID, unlike, for example, the U.S. military is allowed to share what they do and the importance of having a strong defense. USAID is actually prohibited by law, and there are regulations from doing internal messaging within the continental US. We're allowed to do it overseas, as you know, but we cannot do it internally. So that has absolutely been one barrier. And we've had support groups, advocacy groups, if you will, who have done it for USAID. But frankly, it's been an echo chamber of a very small group of kind of inside the Beltway, bipartisan. General Mattis was the first to say, if you don't fund USAID, you're going to have to buy me more bullets. So we definitely have had supporters across the political spectrum and from our colleagues in the defense industry. But it's very much a small echo chamber. So what we're really working on right now, and several of us who have been outside now for some time, is how do we actually reach Middle America? And what we're finding is there are certain issues that really resonate well with key constituents across the U.S. We would have thought, for example, farm assistance, food aid, assistance from our farmers would have surveyed really high, and in the sense of breaking through the noise, and that would move Americans to support foreign assistance. And actually what we found in the data was, no, they feel like actually the American farmers have been subsidized for a very long time, but they do care about migration. Well, a lot of our assistance goes to prevent migration. I served in USAID Colombia, and Colombia has a partnership with the United States, Plan Colombia, and particularly on migration, to help support 3 million Venezuelan migrants to stay in Colombia. So that survey is very high. And I think we just have to understand where the American public is at, and we need to give them the information that they deserve, and we need to build the support. And in many ways, this is not a good thing. This is horrible for the world. There are people who are losing their lives because of this really absolutely reckless destruction of USAID and its programs, from PEPFAR to the Malaria Initiative and onward. But we are going to rise to the challenge, because that's what we do as development professionals. And I think, in the long run, I hope we can build even more support and do even more good in the future.
That is extremely upbeat. Ann Posner, let me get you in here. You and your late husband, Bob, who I also knew, spent much of your life, much of your career at USAID. What are we losing if we lose USAID?
Well, in addition to what was described by Susan and Francisco so very well, one of the things is our outreach, our information, because even though we don't think that anything's going to get to us, I remember working on the Africa Ebola unit, and what happened was there was an outbreak of Ebola in Western Africa, and how long did it take before somebody flew from West Africa to the United States of America over Texas, and somebody gets sick? I mean, it's everywhere, and it's so easy for Americans to be very insular and tell, oh, guess what? Viruses, this is a crowded world. Viruses and everything else goes all around the world. Now you look at what is it now? Measles in Texas. I mean, really, take a look at it and we're going to see it. And so USAID gave that information. They helped the citizens of these other countries, but they also got information from working in these other countries and saw what could be done. Pardon me, I have a cold, and so when I try to talk, it's like I start shrilling.
It's fine. Now, what you're saying is important. I have often studied in school and seen in action the soft power of this diplomacy that USAID was a part of. Francisco, you must see this too, working in your area. where it seems to me we're giving away goodwill and the power that came from it.
Yeah, absolutely. In the last decade, China has created its Belt and Road Initiative, spent trillions of
Right.
dollars to influence and shape the international order in their own view. And USAID was one of the few tools, national tools and instruments of national power that we use to compete with our adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran. And instead of leveraging that tool to make it better and more effective, we self-sabotaged and destroyed one of our key instruments of national power in over 100 countries.
You anticipated my question. Do you see China seeing this as a great opportunity and moving in to take over?
You know, what's interesting is that I actually don't think China needs to do much. For the last decade, China has been telling our partners that the United States is not a reliable partner, that democracies come and go, but authoritarians are here to stay, and we're more predictable long-term partners for you and everybody else. This only reinforces that message. And so China actually doesn't really have to roll out or meet the same amount that USA does. It just has to make small offers of assistance to really demonstrate that it is here for the long run as opposed to the United States.
Wow. Did any of you anticipate this? Did you see this coming? I'm not calling on anyone in particular, but raise your hand or jump in here. Were you shocked how did you first hear about it? How did you first become aware that USAID was this target? Susan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all expected that there was going to be a reduction in foreign assistance, and I was there for the transition for the first Trump administration, and we did a lot of reducing budgets, getting out of countries, preparing memos. But no, I was shocked in the Friday after the inauguration when they issued the stop work order. That's a totally different level of just an executive order on foreign assistance, which came out the day after the inauguration. But the stop work order, that's when we knew it was going to be bad, because that's just never happened before. It's unprecedented. And I know Francisco had something he wanted to weigh in on.
Jump in.
Thank you, Susan. I just wanted to say that in December, right before the transition, I was meeting with both sides of the aisle in Congress, and they were applauding USAID's work on a bipartisan basis. So to then, a couple weeks later, see a complete reversal of, again, a program that has, a lot of bipartisan support, that is the American betrayal on our own, government.
Oh my gosh.
And how about you, Ann? How did you hear about it? Were you shocked, or was like you were braced for it?
I was shocked, except that a few weeks before, I had begun to get calls from former colleagues who were still working with USAID and like, oh, something was up, somebody had to rearrange the for downsizing different missions. And I was going, oh my God. And so it was like looming, but I wasn't sure, just like a storm clouds on the horizon.
Right. I want to hear if any of you took this personally. You've got years, decades in some cases, involved in this work, and to hear it belittled, really vilified in the Twitter, I guess we call it X's now, that come out on social media about the program and the bad mouthing. Do you take this personally? You've been up and down in bureaucracy, but I've never seen anything like this, and I'm not even involved in it. What do you think? Susan, start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I've heard many people describe this is like losing a loved one. There are many stages of grief that people have been going through because it was not just we're going to do a review, we're going to get out of some things, we're going to, but USAID would continue to exist, but it would maybe even be a very, very small USAID. This was actually attacking not just the agency, but the people and the entire ecosystem of development.
Right.
And 2 weeks after the inauguration, calling us worms, calling it a corrupt institution.
Right.
That really hit everyone very hard, including myself. And I'd say I was in the stage of grief of anger for a very long time. I think what was helpful to many of us who were particularly here in the DC area is we were able to honor our colleagues by going down to the Ronald Reagan building, by gathering as a community, by clapping out and celebrating, frankly, the work as we were all grieving the loss of USAID. We also were able to support each other. So but I'm sure Francisco and Anne, I'm not sure physically where you all are, because it does in some ways help to be in the DC metro area, because everyone can help each other here.
Francisco, go ahead. How about you?
What I'll say is that I always said that USAID was a really special place because it brought some of the smartest do-gooders, but problem solvers together. So economists,
Exactly.
environmental scientists, conflict resolution experts. And it was really my job to help bring maybe a China or national security perspective to some of those conversations. So for this administration to say there was no national security imperative couldn't be further from the truth, because I saw it every day that I worked with my colleagues, again, to solve and advance U.S. American interests. And to Susan's point, I was on a call when at the same time I was watching the news, where President Trump called it a criminal organization. And to watch your own government call people who are humanitarians, whose only crime was trying to do better for the world and for the American, public, was extremely disheartening. And like I said before, frankly, a real betrayal.
We're going to take a small break here. This is an Armeo on the Brink, and we're talking with 3 longtime employees and fans, may I say, of USAID, and what they're going through now is it is the target of DOGE and the Trump administration. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to In Our Mayo on the Brink. We are talking with some career specialists with USAID, and you know the topic. We're talking about the gutting of this longtime federal agency that's been the place where John F. Kennedy thought all development and poverty reduction programs and foreign aid might be concentrated. Apparently, we're not going to do that anymore, or we're going to do it in some other way. Can you envision what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, might have in mind? And I'm going to start with Anne on this.
I have no idea what the man has in mind, because there are so many things that are not replaceable.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, you've gotten me inarticulate about what on earth can you do. It's just they went after, I think, the shining light. They went after his accusation was a ploy. Like, go after USAID. Aid was squeaky clean. As an EXO management officer, I would see how rigid they were about their rules and about the controllers, and how are they going to do anything like that again and portray anything that's as honest as it was? I don't know.
that's true.
Good luck.
Francisco, do you have any ideas for Secretary of State? And
No.
also, before you talk, let me add in this little thing too, because I did a lot of research and I'm confused. it seems to me there's some contradiction or friction between Doge and the Secretary of State over Doge just wants to eliminate foreign aid, it seems, totally. Whereas Marco Rubio maybe doesn't want to give up this little euro that he has control over. I'm not sure. Tell me what you're thinking on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to get into behind some of their
Right.
motivations or minds. What I will say is that then Senator Rubio was a big supporter of USAID, and
Right.
a couple of outlets have actually, put up the videos and letters that he has, published lauding the work that USAID has done on national security, particularly as it relates to strategic competition with China. And so this has become, depending on which, Secretary Rubio you're talking to, it's really unclear, to sort of see where the future. But this point that Anne makes about human capital being lost, the entire ecosystem of development, humanitarian experts going away and being lost forever, it really cannot be understated, because this is not something you can turn on or off and hope that we restart back in a couple of years.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, where do people who do not have the option of retiring go? It's not like there are other USAID type agencies in even other governments. I can think of Scandinavian countries and maybe England or Canada, but that's why would they be hiring Americans even? Is there a job market for your colleagues? Francisco first.
It's tough times out there, to be honest. What I will say is that the community is resilient. Again, there's some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, and so I don't know how long it'll take, but I know that something will happen in terms of them finding new opportunities. But in the process, the U.S. government loses all of that expertise, that commitment to public service, and you can't reteach that in a matter of months.
And one thing that hasn't scared me, I guess, now I was going to say impressed, but it scared me, has been how dangerously and irresponsibly this shutdown has been handled. The ProPublica has an article this week about an airbase outside of Saigon where an Agent Orange project, a cleanup project, was simply stopped in the middle. There are open pits of dioxin 90 minutes away from this huge city, Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City now. And it's just open pits that rainy season is about to begin. And workers just had to stop because their money was cut off. I've heard about Ebola victims in Africa who will now not have any support. And we keep hearing about malaria programs all over the tropical world, which mostly were supported by USAID. Can you give us a picture? You've been out in the field. Give me a picture of what it really is at stake. What goes away and what's the danger when there is no USAID? And I've asked.
Oh, I'm sorry. My gosh, one of the things that has not been mentioned yet in our discussion is of what we call our Foreign Service national professionals. They're all around the world, and they all just lost their jobs suddenly, and now they're all looking again. Some of them are in dangerous situations because they work for or live in a place where their government is not necessarily pro-American, and so there they are, and they're out there. But we have, like, for example, people who were health experts, and they were professional people who were working for USAID. They're gone. So you look at all around the world, we've lost that knowledge and the human capital, and lost the goodwill. But the knowledge base is, my God, how do you restore that? And so, who knows? All I can do is stutter.
It is really shocking. Can you think of any projects, Francisco, in China and Taiwan, which were your areas of concern, that you particularly think the world is going to miss?
Yeah, absolutely. And while I do that, I'm glad you brought up Agent Orange, because it is such a perfect example of a USAID program that was really helpful, not only to the people of Vietnam. I mean, just to give you a little bit of context, during the Vietnam War, the United States dropped, 50 million liters of Agent Orange in Vietnam. And
Oh
so
my
one of
goodness.
the ways the United States has rebuilt and repaired from going from sworn enemies with the Vietnamese to an area of strategic partnership is by making cleanup of Agent Orange
Mm,
a priority in the relationship. There is no stronger symbolic program or effort of enemies turned into partners in the international
Right.
community than this USAID program for
mm,
Agent Orange. And Vietnam is also one of our partners. It neighbors China. It is a party to the dispute on the South China Sea, and it's really paid dividends in being a larger partner as we deal with China's revision in multiple areas around the world. And so and that's just one of the many examples. I testified a few weeks ago before Congress. We part of the agreement to have the freely associated states in the Northern Pacific. So that's with the Marshall Islands, the Federated State of Micronesia, and with Palau, was that we would have, through USAID, provide natural disaster assistance to any of these countries. We're in the midst of cyclone season, and all of a sudden, there is no agency that can respond as per this executive congressional agreement to our partners in their time of need. Whereas anyone who's been to the Pacific Islands knows that they're one natural disaster away from calamity. And so, perfect example of us failing to meet our commitments in a place where China is really increasing its influence and contesting, U.S. power projection.
Oh, that's such a good point.
mm,
Of course, the Trump administration maintains that Congress can always step in and deliver humanitarian aid in the case of a tsunami or a cyclone or any other natural disaster. But USAID was primed for that. That's right. To talk about that. Please don't let me say it. You did it. You did the work. Tell us about it.
I'll go first, Anna, unless you
Sure.
want to. Just to quickly say that Congress can pass all the legislation it wants, but it needs somebody to implement it. And without USAID, without the human capital, the expertise, pre-positioned resources able to rapidly respond to that disaster, lives are at stake. Leadership, the commitments are all. These are issues where a day could make a huge difference in terms of response. And so we need an agency that is fully resourced and ready to go. And my understanding is that all of the humanitarian capabilities are in different stages of, torn apart after the last couple weeks.
Exactly. So yes. So Congress can say, yes, oh my goodness, we can respond. Well, how do they respond? Say, go for it.
Right.
They need the expertise.
Yeah, they need the mechanism which they decide.
Exactly.
Talk a little bit more about Congress. There are many who maintain, I guess it's the courts have to weigh in on it, that this whole dismantling has been illegal. Congress put together USAID. It should be Congress that takes it apart. That's not been the way it works. Congress has not been your friend in this, not been the friend of USAID, right, Ann?
No, it hasn't been. And it seems like Congress is pretty cowed right now. I'm pretty surprised at the Democrats that are left, except for a couple of them. But it seems like Rubio, well, I don't know if there's anything other than empty promises, but I am really surprised that there is so little help amongst even the more broader thinking Republican senators or congressmen. It's just shocking for me.
Mm-hmm. Have you written to your congressman?
I called them.
You called them? Did you get any response?
No.
No. How about you, Francisco? Have you tried reasoning with anybody in power?
So I used to work on the Hill for 5 years, and so I
I
reached
know,
out.
that's why I'm asking.
So I reached out to a lot of my former friends. Look, the reality is that Advisor Musk has threatened one party to primary them and throw cash against any opponent that speaks out against us. It's why this podcast and it's so important. We need people to speak out. We need people to explain and make the case for why USAID is important for economic and national security, because frankly, voices are being silenced, and that's why we're not seeing leadership in the halls of Congress.
One thing we haven't talked about is my particular area of interest, and that was media development. I never worked for the government, but I worked in projects overseas in several places that were fully or mostly supported by USAID. Because if you want to do media development, the money for it came hugely, but almost exclusively from the US government.
Mhm.
And now that's being seen as a sign of corruption, that this was some sort of propaganda. I've seen even an organization, and you know about it because it operated based in Sarajevo, the
Right.
Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, a model of media development, of teaching journalists in countries that never had a free press how it works, how you go about looking at and criticizing and looking deeply into government functions. It was a model for that. It's now being portrayed as a stooge for the government, that we were somehow printing out American propaganda. And I don't think it's unrelated that the Voice of America is also one of the agencies like USAID that's facing shutdown. I don't understand this. We seem to be in an age where the president is just going to say America is great and the world better believe it, or he's going to invade them or do something, take away their funding, rather than persuading people and bringing them to our way of thinking. I don't know. I like you. I'm not stuttering. I'm just speaking it just in volumes because I can't get my head around this, how we have flipped so quickly. Do you think this is what American people really want? Or is it my theory is right that they just don't know what's going on?
I don't think that this is what American people really want. And I think that they're rethinking, or many of them, even maybe most of them, are rethinking what their votes were in 2024. And what can they do? I don't know, because they have in power a person who's, I don't know. I guess Hitler was originally democratically elected. Yes. Is that the path we're on? It's scary.
Many people are asking that question. And this is so funny to be talking about USAID people about politics, because the people I worked with in the past wanted to avoid that. You were about development, not politics. Is that not right, Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked with people that were just focused on getting the job done right,
Yeah.
trying to be apolitical, and just be technical experts. And we knew the political leadership would change. My colleagues were preparing for political leadership to change, and they were eager to help implement the new president's agenda. But instead, they got the entire agency cut under them.
Now that we know what's going on, USAID was the first. There have been other agencies now facing the same thing. Would you have any advice for people working in other bureaus facing the same kind of trauma that your ex-colleagues have? Anne?
I'm retired, so I don't know what to do. I mean, I don't know what fields are promising now. It's just, I wish I could. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're in the same boat as many of us. Francisco, how about you? Do you have any advice to federal workers facing the same kind of closure and shutdown that your agency has gone through?
Yeah, I mean, to your point about media, democracy really does die in darkness, and so it's really important to document everything that you're seeing, because there are, even if it's a tough time for oversight, there are congressional whistleblower, there are outside lawyers and counsel who are working and to try to get judges and courts to really uphold the rule of law. And one of the things that I saw was during the first couple of days and weeks was just, again, colleagues who had been put on leave, all of a sudden learning how to, go to Congress and advocate for their jobs and really help, the American public really understand the consequences of the actions that are being taken. And I think that is extremely important because one of the things that this administration first did was take every type of information down because it knows that it benefits when people don't have access to information.
No, I was really surprised by Susan's apparent optimism and like we can do it. We'll get our act together and come back stronger than ever. To me, I just feel this great demoralization. People are watching and not doing much about the shutdown of medical programs and libraries now. So why are they going to care about malaria programs in Africa or poverty reduction programs in Bangladesh? I feel like there's this, maybe I am just completely despairing, but I do feel like this great new apathy coming over the country, very different from the era in the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was creating the Peace Corps and setting up USAID. Have we really come that far? Anne?
I think that in some ways things always spring anew. I think that there is a way, and if you look at American history, which I've been looking at a lot lately, I can see that there has been times when the country seemed to be expanding, and then other times when, like in the 30s, when people were paranoid. And so that's kind of where we are right now. But I'm hoping that it's a cyclical thing and that we again reach out. I know that one thing that and this is not a government thing, but a church that I attend, which is a very large one, had a couple of people from Global Refuge talking to us whose budget has been cut, their NGO budget been cut by some State Department funding about 90%, I think it was huge. And they talked about what they were still going to do and how much it would take, and not too much. And I'm thinking, these are young people who are scraping it back together again. And so again, nothing that will replace what USAID had. You're not talking about, 1,000 per 1,000, but I'm talking about at least springing hope and letting people know that we're going to do something.
Nice.
We're going to look forward.
We all are going to. Francisco, do you want to add to that's kind of a nice note to end on?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I'm a big believer that the pendulum always swings. And so, what's keeping me optimistic is, again, seeing my former colleagues organize, really apply the hard work of democracy abroad to now rebuilding our democracy here at home. The fact that calls among the congressional offices are nonstop, the town halls are full. People are starting to pay attention to the news nonstop. It gives me a little bit of hope that our country can rebuild.
Talking about hope is important to the despairing people I was just talking about, including my listeners. And you may be right. All that human capital you talked about, the expertise in building democracy, is now needed at home, and it's here now. These are people available. When we first started working on media development in Bosnia, young reporters would say to us, "Oh, you can't talk to us. It's not at all the same where you work. You don't have to worry about corruption and about government doing crazy things like we have to worry about." And I thought then, yeah, you're right. We have it made. We don't have it so made anymore, but we do know how to fight it. We have seen people improve, live under bad conditions, and improve elsewhere. And maybe we can do it here as well. I want to thank Susan Reichley and Francisco Bencosme. I'm going to practice your name. I want to thank Susan Reichley, Francisco Bencosme, and Ann Posner, all USAID veterans, for talking about the situation of gutting that agency. Thank you so much.